What are the three basic prerequisites for a conviction of speeding based on radar? I'm Tulsa attorney James Worth, and that is the question that we're dealing with here, and actually comes from a court case in the state of Oklahoma dealing with this issue. It's Shears v. State, 1982, OKCR 105. So this goes all the way back to 1982 and talking about the evidence of bringing in information from a radar detector to determine speed. Generally speaking, if you've got technology and information or using science, then you would need somebody to come in to testify as to the validity of that and the reliability of that. But here in 1982, the state of Oklahoma, Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals put forth basically the three requirements for that, and they list them as the scientific reliability of radar as a recorder of speed, the accuracy of the particular speedometer or a speed meter used in the given case, so the radar in that case, and the proper operation of the radar equipment. So those three things. So for the first thing, it's talking about generally, is the technology of using radar to determine speed, is that reliable? And what the court found there is it says that most states now agree that the usefulness of radar equipment for testing the speed of vehicles has become so well established that the testimony of an expert to prove the reliability of the radar is no longer necessary, and that in fact judicial knowledge of such fact may be taken by the courts. So for the first step, whether this is technology actually works, whether radar is a good measure of speed, generally speaking, scientifically speaking, it's saying no longer requires an expert to testify as that, no longer requires Daubert testing on that issue. The court can take essentially judicial notice or judicial knowledge of that fact, which brings us to the second one then. So the second one, the accuracy of the particular radar unit. So how do you determine whether that radar unit is accurate? And that would, if you're making this an issue, require testimony. Normally, the officer would come in, talk about his radar unit and how it is calibrated and how it is determined to be reliable. Typically, they'll talk about external reliability testing and internal. So the external, normally have a tuning fork, which is a device that they can hit that vibrates, and it is used to determine, it should set the radar to determine a specific speed. So you hit that tuning fork, you point the radar at it, and you see if it comes up at that speed. If so, then it appears to be appropriately calibrated. So the question comes up though at that point, and it was raised in this case, well, what about if there's something wrong with the tuning fork? Okay, we've proven the tuning fork is used to prove the reliability of the radar, but what evidence do we have of the reliability of the tuning fork? And the court said essentially we're not going to go down that trail. If we do that, it can go on it can keep going on through to infinity. Well, whatever you use to determine that the tuning fork is accurate, well, how do we know that that is accurate? So on and so forth. So it notes that we're not going to do that. The quote that it says is that, in effect, the defendant's argument is that any comparative testing device used to determine whether the particular radar equipment was accurate and functioning properly must themselves be proved accurate and functioning properly. And to that it says we cannot agree. Such a chain of evidence might have to proceed ad infinitum. And that's what the court found there. So they're not going to require them to prove that the tuning fork itself is reliable unless the defense has a suggestion that it may not be. So sometimes you'll see questions related to whether that tuning fork has been dropped or it hasn't been bent or broken in some way that could change the frequency that it resonates when it is hit for the purposes of testing. So that's number two. Number three, the proper operation of the radar equipment. So that is something that you could get into if you're having a trial on a speeding ticket, and that's normally done through the testimony of the officer. So the prosecutor put the officer on the stand, in addition to, like we talked about, testifying as to how the reliability is determined on the radar, which reminds me that we didn't talk about external, or I'm sorry, we talked about external, the tuning fork, we didn't talk about internal. So modern day radar equipments have in their own internal mechanism where it's got a device inside the unit that creates a frequency resonation that the radar then can hit and see if it matches. It's got software to do that internally. So usually on these, there's an internal method and there's also an external method. Okay, that brings us back to the proper operation of the radar equipment. So that's where the officer would testify as to his training experience in using not just radar in general, but the particular equipment there. And then the court would normally have to believe that he's had sufficient training and experience, only based on his own testimony, that he knows how to use the unit properly, and then particularly on that specific date and time when he was using it, and clocked the defendant that he was following his training and used the appropriate methods for the device and got an accurate reading as a result. So those are the three things that you could look at as far as the prerequisite to a conviction for a speeding ticket if you rate these as an issue. Number one, scientific reliability, which again the court will take its own judicial knowledge of. Two, accuracy of the particular radar used in the given case. That's where we talk about internal and external calibration for reliability. And then three, the proper operation of the radar equipment. That's where we're talking about the officer's training and experience. Does he know how to use the unit properly? Did he, in fact, on that day use it properly? If you're dealing with a speeding ticket and have questions on how to fight that, you're probably going to want to talk to an attorney privately and confidentially about that. To schedule that with an attorney at my office, you go online to makelaweasy.com.